Alex, who is 36 years old and male, was my college sweetheart. He had those dreamy eyes and a strong, buff physique, and he used to enjoy playfully carrying me around to tease me. We tied the knot in a charming church ceremony and spent a wonderful 10 years together. Our relationship was the talk of the town, and our friends envied us. As a 36-year-old female, I cherished Alex with all my heart, envisioning a future where we'd grow old together, hand in hand. Alex proved to be an exceptional husband. He consistently showed unwavering dedication to our marriage and family. His loyalty, faithfulness, and reliability were unmatched, and he effortlessly placed my needs and happiness at the forefront. He treated me with respect, kindness, and empathy, making sure I always felt loved and valued. He had a keen ear for my concerns and readily offered his assistance whenever needed. Alex wholeheartedly supported my goals and dreams, offering guidance and help whenever I sought it. He was patient and understanding, making a genuine effort to see things from my perspective. Honesty was his policy, and he maintained open and transparent communication. He didn't keep secrets or withhold important information from me, valuing candid discussions. I took great pride in my choice of husband, appreciating his steadfastness, although a little extra excitement in the bedroom wouldn't have hurt. One day, I crossed paths with a guy named Ethan, a 22-year-old man, at a business conference. We immediately hit it off, and I found myself captivated by Ethan's charisma and charm. We swapped numbers and soon started having regular phone conversations and text exchanges. I knew it was wrong to engage with another man this way, but I couldn't resist. Things between Ethan and me quickly escalated. We began meeting in secret, and before I knew it, we were involved in an affair. Guilt consumed me whenever I saw Ethan, but his allure was irresistible. He awakened feelings of vitality and desire in me that I hadn't experienced with Alex in a long time. I was fully aware of the wrongdoing, but I couldn't put an end to it. I found myself ensnared in a web of lies and deceit that occupied my every thought. I loved Alex deeply, but I also had strong feelings for Ethan. Eventually, Alex discovered my affair with Ethan, and it shattered him. He couldn't comprehend why I would do such a thing. I attempted to explain that I was unhappy in our marriage, and that Ethan made me feel alive again. But Alex's pain was too overwhelming for him to hear me out. He was only aware of the emotional aspect of our affair. Had he known about the physical aspect, I dread to think how he would have reacted. Alex implored me to end the affair and work on our marriage, but I was torn between my love for him and my feelings for Ethan, even though I didn't vocalize this internal struggle to him. I didn't want to cause harm, but I found myself at a crossroads. Then, one day, while I was out walking, I came across an elderly couple holding hands. They exuded happiness and contentment, which stirred up envy within me. It made me realize that what I had with Alex was truly special, and I didn't want to let it slip away. So, I reached out to Alex and asked to meet up. We sat down for a lengthy conversation about our marriage. I mustered the courage to be honest with Alex about how I had been feeling neglected and unhappy, and he listened attentively. He expressed his love for me and a desire to work on our relationship, but he made it clear that I needed to end things with Ethan. It was a difficult choice, but I knew it was the right one. I called Ethan and informed him that it was over between us. Ethan was devastated, but he comprehended my decision. I understood that I had deeply wounded both men, but I was committed to mending my marriage. Over the following months, Alex and I dedicated ourselves to improving our relationship. We sought counseling to enhance our communication skills and rekindled our romance by going on dates and rediscovering the activities we enjoyed together when our relationship first blossomed. It dawned on me that I had taken Alex for granted and that he was the man I genuinely loved. In due course, Alex forgave me for my affair, and we left the past behind. We grew closer than ever, solidifying my belief that choosing Alex over Ethan was the right path. I learned that the grass isn't always greener on the other side, and that sometimes what we seek is right before our eyes. Alex and I had reached new heights in our relationship. I was accustomed to receiving beautiful bouquets of roses, both at my workplace and home, along with sweetly signed cards from him, all displaying his passionate love. Given this perfection, why did I still yearn for Ethan's presence? Thinking of him was forbidden, let alone plotting how to reconnect with him. My willpower was strong, but my physical desires were frail. Against my better judgment, I reached out to Ethan, confessing my love and suggesting a risky rekindling of our secret affair. He admitted missing me too, and our affair reignited with an unprecedented passion. Alex remained oblivious to it all. I was careful to cover my tracks, both in the real world and online. His week-long trip to another state was approaching, and I eagerly shared the news with Ethan, anticipating unrestricted time together at my place. The day arrived, and a teary-eyed Alex expressed how much he'd miss me. I shed a few tears too, but deep inside I felt a sense of freedom in being alone. Less than half an hour after his departure, Ethan arrived at our house, his face beaming with anticipation. Without exchanging greetings, he swept me up and began searching for the bedroom. Meanwhile, I heard some noise downstairs, but paid it no mind, fully absorbed in my intense encounter with Ethan. However, not even 2 minutes later, Alex stood in the doorway of our bedroom, utterly shocked to find me in our marital bed with another man. He uttered, "How could you? I trusted you, forgave you, and gave you everything, absolutely everything." That's what Alex shouted as he stormed down the stairs. I was left speechless, hastily wrapping myself in a sheet as I rushed downstairs to explain that things weren't what they seemed. But I couldn't catch up to him. An hour later, he sent a text instructing me to leave his house. I immediately escorted Ethan out and began packing my belongings while trying to figure out where to go. Ultimately, I chose to return to my mother's place. I attempted to reach Alex through countless texts and calls, but he remained unresponsive. A week later, divorce papers arrived at my mother's address. He didn't engage in conversation, offer therapy, or attempt to resolve our issues. Instead, he swiftly pursued a divorce, leaving me to question how much I ever truly mattered to him. To compound the situation, my mother had insisted on a prenuptial agreement, so assets and income acquired during our marriage were held under each other's names. This meant Alex received 80% of our properties, given his significantly higher income. I was left with nearly nothing to my name and no place to call home. I couldn't even claim child support because, despite our numerous efforts, we hadn't been able to conceive. Surviving under these circumstances seemed daunting, and life felt incredibly unjust.
All right, that was a fun story. Now let's move on to another exciting one. Stay tuned, and let's dive in.
My wife is 45 years old, and I'm 51. We've been married for a quarter century, residing in the Midwest and making a living as farmers. Our family consists of 2 children, an 18-year-old daughter who recently started college and a son who sadly passed away 5 years ago. He would have turned 20 if he were still with us. My journey with my wife began when I began working for her grandparents, fellow farmers who primarily focused on cattle raising and cultivating crops like corn and wheat. Given her parents' separation, she found more happiness living with her grandparents rather than her parents. When she reached 18, she made the choice to move in with her grandparents and contribute to their farm. What sets my wife apart is that she's not your typical woman, and that's one of the things that makes her extraordinary. She possesses beauty with her long blonde hair and keeps herself in great shape. She's unafraid of getting her hands dirty during work, and she takes excellent care of our animals. Her knowledge of farm tools and machinery is extensive. When I first met her 3 decades ago, I was captivated by her both for her looks and her capabilities. Encountering a small-town girl who was simultaneously tough and attractive was a unique experience for me. She really enjoyed having fun with the guys who worked for her grandparents on the farm, and everyone really liked her. I was just a country boy who grew up around farms and didn't know much else. My parents were farmers too, but they weren't as successful as my wife's grandparents, who were on a completely different level. When my wife turned 19, we started dating. We had a great working relationship, and it seemed like marriage was just a matter of time. Things were going well, especially because our son had a natural talent for farming, just like both my wife and me. He showed a lot of promise and often took the initiative to handle tasks on the farm without needing guidance. Then, a tragic incident happened. One day, while driving his truck on I-94, a big 18-wheeler lost control and crashed into his truck. He didn't survive the accident and passed away instantly. The loss we experienced was incredibly heartbreaking. My wife, in particular, struggled profoundly with the pain of our son's absence. After our son's funeral, a significant change occurred in her. It was as if she underwent a complete transformation, becoming almost unrecognizable. This change had a deep impact on various aspects of her life. Her activity and involvement on the farm decreased significantly, and instead, she spent entire days in bed. She began to grapple with an anxiety disorder, causing her to become excessively attached, both physically and emotionally. Her level of attachment grew to an intense degree, surpassing what it used to be. I found myself having to make an effort just to leave for work in the mornings or to attend to our daughter. Her demeanor took on an overwhelmingly negative tone, which was a stark departure from her previous self. It felt like she had become the opposite of the person she was before our son's passing. At night, finding personal space in bed became quite challenging. She had a strong desire to cuddle throughout the night, but her grip was so tight that it made breathing difficult. It felt like being in a tight hold, similar to what you'd experience with a Muay Thai fighter. Even when I thought she was asleep, she continued to cling tightly. She seemed to require kisses every hour or two, a behavior completely unlike her before our son's accident. Our bed life went through significant changes as well. Before, we were moderately active, being intimate around 2 or 3 times a week. However, after our son's passing, that frequency increased dramatically to almost twice or more every day, even when I didn't feel like it. This happened while we were still mourning the loss of our son. What I came to realize was that this intense need for closeness was her way of grieving, a level of clinginess I had never seen in her before. There are times when I don't really feel like engaging in that activity, and I express my hesitation at first. However, she doesn't seem to pay attention to my protests. It seems like she wants it so much that I don't want to upset her by declining. During those moments, it's as if we only do things that interest her, and I don't get a chance to voice my preferences or desires. It's like the focus is solely on what pleases her. It's starting to feel like our intimate moments are becoming more about satisfying her needs and desires. I began to wonder if this act is turning into something I need to do for her to find happiness, as a way for her to cope, rather than an activity we engage in together out of love for each other. She tends to get upset over even the smallest things, causing almost everything to turn into an argument. From time to time, when she emerges from her low spirits, she becomes vocal about the state of the farm and sometimes directs her frustration towards our workers. During that period, there was a 14-year-old boy who used to come to the farm to help us out. His parents had problems with misuse and pills. Since he was frequently around, I brought up the idea of adopting him with my wife, considering his tough situation with neglectful parents. However, she strongly opposed the idea. The young boy continued coming to the farm to assist us, and unexpectedly my wife began to grow fond of him. She mentioned that he reminded her of our son, which initially worried me, although I didn't dwell on it too much. About a year later, my wife's condition improved, and a significant part of that change was due to the now 15-year-old boy. He and my wife developed a close bond, but I wasn't concerned about it because I knew he was a good and responsible young man. My wife took the initiative in proposing that we officially adopt the boy to have him spend more time with us. Although he was already around quite often, this adoption was meant to formalize things. Once the adoption process was completed, there was a noticeable positive shift in the atmosphere at home. My wife's mood improved significantly. I started to observe that my wife and our adopted son were growing extremely close. They would engage in late-night conversations after I had gone to bed. She often stayed up much later than her usual bedtime, whereas I tended to go to bed early because my days began before sunrise. My mornings started with a trip to the barn to attend to the cattle. This involved ensuring they had enough food and fresh water because their health was a top priority. I also carefully examined them for any signs of illness or injury and administered any necessary medications. Once I finished looking after the cattle, I moved on to the fields where we grew corn. During planting season, I could be quite busy preparing the soil and planting corn seeds, often with the assistance of my adopted son. When it was the season for corn to grow, my responsibility was to monitor the progress of the corn plants, ensuring they received the appropriate amount of water and nutrients. Sometimes I had to use irrigation to provide proper hydration and apply fertilizers for their nourishment. I also kept a close eye out for any pests or diseases that could harm the corn crop. Depending on the time of year, I might have various tasks to handle. For instance, during harvest time, my adopted son and I, along with some hired hands who were usually close friends of mine, had to oversee the process of gathering the corn using specialized machinery like combine harvesters to efficiently collect the ripe corn ears. After collecting the corn, my responsibility extends to ensuring it's properly stored and transported to various destinations as needed, such as for animal feed or sale. Initially, I wasn't concerned about the close relationship between my wife and adopted son, especially since my daughter also spent time with them. 2 years after our son's tragic passing, life appeared to be slowly returning to normal. Despite the loss, our son's memory remained alive in my heart, a constant presence in my daily life. Strangely, my wife seemed to have coped in a peculiar manner by developing an unusually strong bond with our adopted son. They would often share hugs and watch TV together under a blanket. Over time, this became a common sight that didn't strike me as unusual. Our intimate life underwent significant changes, dwindling to about once every 2 weeks. It didn't concern me too much, as I felt I was getting too old for frequent bedroom activities. After a long day at work, I often lacked the energy for it. Both my adopted son and I dedicated a substantial part of our days to tending to the cattle and managing the cornfields. However, there were also administrative tasks handled by my wife and daughter, such as keeping track of expenses, maintaining records for both the cattle and the corn, and managing paperwork related to regulations or sales. There was one particular day that aroused my suspicion about my wife's interactions with our adopted son. It happened when I couldn't locate my adopted son, and I began searching for him. We had a separate barn area that housed our office, where my wife spent most of her time. I walked in the direction of the office door, as I had a hunch that my adopted son might be inside. Just outside the door, I noticed his dirty shoes, indicating he was likely indoors. The office door had a faulty locking mechanism, preventing it from being locked from the inside. Upon opening the office door, it appeared that I had unexpectedly walked in on something involving my wife and our adopted son. There was a fleeting moment when their expressions conveyed that they were caught off guard. However, at that time, I didn't entertain the possibility of what I thought I had glimpsed. Fast forward 3 years, and our daughter turned 18, heading off to college. This meant that at home, it was primarily just me, our adopted son, and my wife. During the harvest season, we had additional hands assisting on the farm. After a long day's work like that, it was customary for us to visit a bar for some drinks. However, since my adopted son was not yet 19 and below the legal drinking age, he would typically head inside the house early. As the day was coming to an end, I instructed the other workers to go on without me, explaining that I needed to complete a few remaining tasks. I wished to perform a final check on the cattle to ensure they were settled for the night. After completing this task, I took the necessary time to ensure that all our equipment was correctly stored for the evening. Strangely, I felt compelled to go to the office and inform my wife that I was preparing to depart. This was rather out of character for me, given that it had become our established routine to go out after a hectic day of harvesting. As I turned the doorknob and swung open the door, I could already feel a sense of unease settling in my stomach. I experienced a strange feeling as if something was amiss. When the door opened, I was overwhelmed by a sudden and powerful surge of emotions. It was as though time had slowed down, giving me the opportunity to observe every aspect of the scene that was unfolding in front of me. There, in the midst of it all, was my wife, the person I had always held the greatest trust in, on her knees performing BJ on our adopted son. My heart raced within my chest as shock and disbelief washed over me like an unexpected wave. My mind struggled to comprehend what I was witnessing, and I was suddenly overwhelmed by a mix of anger, hurt, and a profound sense of betrayal. These emotions swirled together, leaving me feeling almost numb. I couldn't control myself. My hands clenched into fists, and I took deep, heavy breaths. It was as if a surge of energy coursed through me, making me feel somewhat dizzy. For a moment, it felt like I was suspended in time, disconnected from my surroundings. The room seemed hazy at the edges, my focus narrowed to the distressing scene before me. I had an initial urge to shout, to demand an explanation, and to release the turmoil inside me. Yet, there was another part of me that wanted to avert my gaze, to deny what my eyes were witnessing, and to cling to the hope that it wasn't real. As the seconds ticked by, it became evident that I couldn't evade confronting the unfolding situation. Understanding washed over me forcefully, snapping me out of my initial state of shock and propelling me into a more determined frame of mind. Tears welled up in my eyes, a mixture of sadness and frustration ready to spill over. My voice trembled as I mustered the courage to speak, my question carrying a sense of openness and vulnerability I hadn't felt in a long time. What's happening? My adopted son couldn't meet my gaze directly. Guilt and surprise played across his face. My wife shifted her attention toward me, her eyes revealing shame, regret, and an unusual hint of defiance. A heavy silence hung in the air, broken only by the irregular rhythm of my own breaths. In that moment, it hit me like a ton of bricks. Everything had changed. The solid foundation of trust upon which our relationship rested had crumbled, and there was no way to undo it. Betrayal seemed to emanate from both my wife and my adopted son. Anger surged through me as I grabbed him by the neck and forcibly removed him from the room, my wife's screams echoing in my ears as she tried to intervene. My rage was so intense that I had a strong urge to harm him, but I managed to restrain myself. I sternly warned him that if he ever set foot in our house again, there would be consequences. Having said that, I turned away and left behind a whirlwind of intense pain and confusion. In the midst of this overwhelming emotional turmoil, I headed to the bar to be in the company of my friends, hoping to temporarily forget the shocking scene I had just witnessed. At that moment, I had no desire to be alone, even though it was challenging not to dwell on what had transpired. The weight of the situation felt crushing, and the intensity of my emotions was almost too much to bear. At the bar, I attempted to drown out my thoughts, but they proved difficult to escape entirely. The sheer magnitude of it all was simply too immense. The recurring question that echoed in my mind was how long this had been happening. We had adopted him at the age of 14, and he was nearly 19 when I uncovered the truth. But it was impossible to determine the exact duration. Eventually, the noise in my head became overwhelmingly loud, prompting me to decide to head home early. The need to confront my wife and come face to face with the harsh reality of the situation had grown too insistent to ignore. Upon my arrival home, my wife was nowhere to be found, and it was clear that my adopted son had packed his belongings and left as well. It was at this moment that the full weight of the situation hit me, and I could no longer hold back the tears. The enormity of my son's passing and how my wife had spiraled into a destructive path, ultimately leading to the downfall of our family, became painfully evident. I called my daughter and described the troubling scene I had witnessed involving her mother. Surprisingly, she wasn't taken aback by the news. She shared that she had already suspected that something unusual was going on between them, even though she hadn't actually witnessed it. Unlike my daughter, who was ready to confront the situation, my wife exhibited cowardice. She refused to return home for several months and ignored all attempts at communication. When my daughter reached out to her, my wife's initial reaction was to claim it was a mistake. However, she later admitted that her feelings had deepened and she had developed romantic affection for our adopted son. She expressed her fear about how I would react to this revelation. My daughter informed me that both my wife and our adopted son were staying at an undisclosed hotel, adding to my sense of confusion and disorientation. Despite dedicating my life to managing and operating the farm, I legally owned nothing because my wife had inherited it from her grandparents. The feeling of betrayal was overwhelming. Lost and uncertain, I examined our business accounts and discovered that a significant amount of money had been recently withdrawn. In response, I withdrew the remaining funds and opened a new business account to prevent her from accessing it. The weight of the situation left me deeply conflicted. I had always envisioned retiring on the farm, but now I faced a dilemma. If I were to file for divorce, I understood that I stood to lose everything I had invested in. Despite having enough money saved to support myself until I reached the age of 80, my passion for my work was still strong. I made the decision to consult a divorce lawyer to seek advice on how to proceed with the marriage. The lawyer's counsel was to stay married due to the potential financial losses I might incur if I chose to leave. I hesitated to make our situation public knowledge, considering our limited family connections and the impact it could have on our small community. Throughout this ordeal, my daughter stood by my side, providing unwavering support that meant the world to me. Her presence was reassuring. Then, out of the blue, my wife called me after about 2 months had passed. During the call, she expressed her desire to come back home and offered an apology for her betrayal. She also mentioned undergoing therapy with the intention of mending our marriage. To be honest, I had some troubling thoughts. The urge to divorce her immediately was strong, but the potential losses held me back. The moment I witnessed her in that situation, all the love and respect I had for her disappeared. My heart seemed to darken, and I even entertained disturbing thoughts. Thoughts of harming her to gain control of everything. The idea of having her back was almost unbearable, but for the memory and sake of my late son, I consciously pushed those dark thoughts away. At present, my plan is to allow my wife to return, but things have changed significantly since I caught her. I've devised a plan to acquire my own piece of land and establish my own cattle herd. Since the passing of my son, her attention has shifted away from the business, and I've taken on the role of driving its operations. I'm the one who comprehends the intricate logistics, maintains customer relationships, and manages the supply chain. While she has played a part, I've essentially been accumulating wealth for her. Now, my focus is turning toward my own well-being. I'm actively working on launching my independent ventures over the next couple of years. My aim is to create something free from her influence. Ultimately, I'm preparing myself for the possibility of divorce by that time, if she is still alive. This decision revolves around my own future and finding a way to move forward independently.
So, folks, what's your opinion on this? Do you believe this gentleman should compromise his dignity to retain his farm, or should he contemplate divorce, risking the loss of everything?
Hello? My life is in complete disarray, and I have no one to turn to for help except you, fellow internet users. Let me provide you with some context. Just over a month ago, my husband Troy, 31 years old, decided to host a wine and dine event with our circle of friends to mark our 3rd anniversary. I wasn't entirely convinced it was a good idea, but he was determined to throw a party to celebrate us. It might sound peculiar, but at that moment, all I could think about was whether his best friend would attend. During a previous night when we were all out together, he kept giving me suggestive glances while dancing at the club. He even signaled for me to join him on the dance floor while Troy was in the restroom dealing with a stomachache. I did decline his dance invitation, but we had all consumed a bit too much alcohol, and he appeared quite attractive with his shirt unbuttoned all the way down. In that instant, I felt a shift in our relationship. I wasn't sure how I would feel when I saw him at the party. I hadn't encountered him since that night, and a few weeks had passed. I wanted to address the moments that had transpired between us and move past them, I guess. A little background. Troy's best friend, Mitch, 34 years old, has been friends with him for 20 years, and I've known Mitch for as long as I've known Troy. However, for the first 2 years of my relationship with my husband, Mitch and I were just platonic friends. But after we got married, it seemed like Mitch was afraid of losing his best friend to marriage. He started accompanying us on almost all our trips and frequently brought along various women since he didn't want to commit to one. My feelings for him remained strictly as a friend, but everything changed after that night at the club. On that particular evening, Troy made a heartfelt toast expressing his love for me and his excitement about having children together. I was overwhelmed with embarrassment and excused myself to the guest bathroom to compose myself. As I was about to leave the bathroom, Mitch followed me in, and what transpired next wasn't something I had planned for. The pleasure was so intense that I couldn't control myself. The thrill of knowing that everyone else was outside while we were engaged in an intimate encounter inside, trying to remain discreet, was oddly exciting. It continued for another 15 minutes until I heard a knock on the door, followed by Troy calling my name. Instantly, guilt washed over me. I pushed Mitch away and pretended I was fixing my appearance. A couple of minutes later, I left the bathroom, with him following me about 30 minutes afterward. We made sure Troy didn't suspect anything. The most troubling aspect of this whole situation is that it wasn't a one-time occurrence. 2 days ago, a week after the party, Mitch came over while Troy was at the gym late. We engaged in an intimate encounter, and it was in the middle of it that I heard Troy entering the room and catching us in the act. My husband had a complete breakdown right in front of us while we were lying in our bed, naked, desperately trying to cover ourselves. It was a horrifying sight. However, he quickly regained his composure and became very angry. Troy physically confronted Mitch and forcefully ejected him from the house at 1 a.m., completely nude, in the freezing -5 degrees weather. Then he turned to me and informed me that I'd be spending the night on the couch. He gathered my belongings on the spot and tossed them out into the living room. I didn't have much of a choice and spent a restless 2 days on the couch, only to receive a text from him 48 hours later with a link that contained a PDF of a plane ticket and a letter. I opened the plane ticket and it had my details on it, showing a flight from New York to Orlando a week from today. I couldn't believe that I had jeopardized a relationship that I had built over 5 years, with 3 of those years being married, for a mere 5-minute indiscretion. What should I do? I still have a week to try and mend things as I can't go back to live with my grandparents. I can't confide in anyone about this, which is why I'm seeking your advice. Please, help me out. Update. I've attempted to communicate with him, but he's isolating himself in the room. He's not going to work, not emerging to have meals. It's been 36 hours since I received the plane ticket, and during this time, I haven't had a meal or slept. I haven't even changed my clothes because I don't want to create a mess in the living room. I'm feeling helpless. I knocked on his door throughout the night, but he didn't respond. All I could hear was the TV playing inside. Finally, he came out and stood at the doorway of the living room. I inquired if he had eaten anything, and I mentioned that I had prepared 2 sandwiches for him to eat. He regarded them as if they were repulsive and then returned to his room without uttering a word. Update. I awoke, realizing it was the day before my scheduled flight. On the coffee table, I noticed bags filled with new clothes and an envelope. Curiosity led me to open one of the bags, and inside, I found the remainder of my belongings, even my miniature collection. Tears welled up in my eyes as the reality of the situation hit me. He hasn't uttered a word to me, and he's been returning home late. I've been cooking for both of us, but I end up eating alone. I often wake up to the sound of him coming home, only to see him head straight to his room. We haven't had any conversations at all. It's astonishing how everything is unraveling so abruptly. I just wish I could comprehend what's going on in his mind. Is he contemplating divorce? I pray that's not the case, because it would be a devastating blow from which I fear I might never recover. It's been a month since I had to leave our shared home and move in with my grandparents. He still hasn't communicated with me. I've sent him over 500 texts, but I'm deeply concerned about his well-being. He has blocked me on all platforms. However, a friend he still follows on Instagram mentioned that he posts stories of himself hiking with his work friends. This eases my worries about his safety. Today, I received a large envelope, and upon opening it, I discovered the divorce papers I had been dreading, along with a letter. I haven't read the letter yet, nor have I signed the divorce papers. Edit. I've read the letter. It was heart-wrenching. I couldn't bring myself to continue reading beyond the first page. In it, he poured out his feelings about the entire situation, expressing his deep love for me and our life together. The letter spanned 3 pages, but I couldn't bear to go beyond the first page. I completed reading the letter. In it, he mentioned that he would be taking time off from work to prioritize his well-being, and that he intends to block me on all platforms. He also mentioned that I should sign the divorce papers and send them back to our address. However, I don't want to do that. I just want him back. I feel terrible for being with someone else other than my husband. It wasn't supposed to happen. I blame myself for this situation, and I genuinely can't imagine my life without him. It has been 4 days since I received the divorce papers, and I have signed them.